Story 1. I had a neighbor who would sneak into my yard at night and roll up my sod. It would be laid perfectly the night before, but I'd get up in the morning and it would be rolled up just like it was when it came from the store. I finally got angry and spent the night lying by my back door with a baseball bat and a flashlight, ready to confront whoever it was. Sure enough, they came around 2 in the morning. I stood up, turned the light on, and was face to face with 4 raccoons rolling up my sod, looking for bugs. Story 2. Had a neighbor who wouldn't let anyone use his driveway because he didn't want it to get dirty, including himself. He parked on the street outside. If he thought you were having a party, he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of who knows what to the end of his driveway so no one could turn around in it. One time I came home and he was outside hosing it down in the rain. To his credit, I've never seen a cleaner driveway. Story 3. Threatened to put giant signs across the wooded border between our properties if my other neighbor got into another border dispute with him. This was after stopping my excavator from doing his job, finishing grading the lot so we could plant grass, and threatening him if he got over the property line. He was 50 feet away from it and not taking down any trees. He finished his rant and left without ever introducing himself. When he's not complaining to the cops about my neighbor, he's doing everything legally possible to annoy the cops themselves. Story 4. Used to live in a little town of 300 people where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage can because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over as she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we had left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't really confident that they would make it, but so far they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. Story 5. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants, and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous at all, but he is not right in the head either. His caretakers are his parents, and they seem to be very nice people. His dad once told me, he just likes to be a cat, and left it at that. I didn't ask any more questions. Story 6. She has a penchant for going around sticking nails in people's tires at night. This has happened dozens of times to nearly everyone on the street, though she's slowed down since more people started installing video cameras and motion sensor lights in their driveways. Story 7. He eats my flowers. In his defense, he told us that he has been doing it for years when he introduced himself after we bought the house. He also brought over frozen cookies in a plastic bag as a housewarming gift but wasn't sure what was in them. We share a side yard, and he is a really great neighbor. Just an older, quiet guy who keeps to himself and eats my flowers. Comes over to my yard and eats the lilies raw, or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. I thought that his particular foraging was interesting and quirky, so I planted a couple of raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago when we first moved in on the side yard we share. I told him to help himself to berries anytime, especially before the birds do. The bushes have all gone insane, and the entire side of my house is now a summer berry haven for us to share. Having a decent relationship with the guy I share a property line with is worth some deadhead flowers. Story 8. We had one a while back that had a meth lab in the home. Crazy fights, yelling at all hours of the night. A guy would wander around the neighborhood acting crazy, and once he threw a Molotov cocktail out of the second-floor window at another guy who was smashing up his car, screaming, "I'll kill you!" Those were interesting times. Story 9. Pulled us over pretending to be a police officer, saying that we had somehow broken the law while pulling out of our driveway and that she was going to report it. She isn't a police officer. I considered using my dashboard camera video to actually report it, but we had just moved in and I wasn't sure if she was the type of person to burn the house down or poison my dog. After chatting with the other neighbors, it turns out she's just the wannabe homeowners association president in a neighborhood with no homeowners association. So mostly harmless, just very annoying. Story 10. He was hopping my fence during the day when I was gone at work to use my backyard pool. When confronted, thanks to a neighbor who informed me, he claimed he had an agreement with the previous tenant that he could use the pool whenever he wanted. Guess what? I'm not that tenant. I have a bunch of security cameras now. Story 11. Well, I used to have a neighbor who was legitimately mentally ill, although I don't know his actual diagnosis. His truck wouldn't start one day due to a dead battery, and he told everyone on the street that another neighbor was stealing the electricity. He knew this because of the way this guy parked his vehicle. Obviously, it was sucking electricity from the ground for his battery, which drained the car batteries near him. Many times he would run down the street and warn everyone to hide their valuables because Japan was invading the country. He wasn't on drugs, but he did take medication for his mental illness, and everyone on our street could tell when he stopped taking it. Whenever he would start saying completely irrational things, we would remind him to take his medication, and he would thank us and go home, presumably to take it. He lived alone, and he was getting older, so I think he had a hard time remembering to take it. There were many, many more incidents. Edited to add. Thanks for the rewards. I've never gotten any before this post. Story 12. He jumped in front of my car while I was driving down the road to yell at me for going through his trash at night. I told him it was probably raccoons. He refuses to believe it to this day. I can't believe this comment blew up. It's crazy to think about. Thank you all for the awards. A lot of you are asking if I did it. I didn't. Story 13. I used to live in a homeowners association. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and me. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day, at the same cut height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. Story 14. Took my parents to court because he lost in our homeowners association chairman election. Some people just have too much free time. Edit. He actually demanded we pay his legal fees after he lost in court. Twice. Story 15. The next door lady is standing on her driveway yelling at me because acorns have fallen from a large oak tree on my property onto her driveway, demanding that I stop the tree from this intentional criminal activity. Story 16. I was dog-sitting, probably about 16 years old. My neighbor charged into the house while I was there with a gun, pointing it at my head while on the phone with the owners of the dog, claiming, "There's an intruder. Real life isn't Call of Duty. I remember you, Daniel. Forget you. Seriously." Story 17. My sister's neighbor reported my sister to the police because her kids were playing in my sister's garden. Not for the usual reasons like too much noise, etc. No, it was because a volcano in Italy had erupted and the radiation would hurt them. My sister lives in the United Kingdom. Story 18. Years ago, in rural Arizona, we shared a pond with the crazy neighbor. More sad than anything, he was in his 40s and lived with his mother around 1988. A Vietnam veteran, he would walk out to our shared pond with a handgun and a box of 50 rounds. He would then absolutely unload on the pond while yelling, collect his brass, and walk quietly home. This happened every 90 days for about 3 years. Story 19. This woman lived next to us and needed the police called on her at least once a week. She would scream at her roommate at all hours of the night, go into a drunken and sometimes drug-filled stupor, and scream at us while tripping out as we sat in our backyard. More than once, I had to kick her out of our home because she walked in unannounced, beer in hand, and drunk as ever. One time I called the police because she was screaming about killing someone and rolling around on her front lawn. Another time I received a call at work at 1 in the morning as I worked the third shift. My girlfriend informed me they had to evacuate the house because the neighbor's garage was on fire. It turned out either she or her roommate had done it while doing drugs or smoking in the garage. She ended up moving away but would still walk to our house to ask for our lawnmower. She was not happy when I told her to get off my porch. Story 20. I cared for an elderly woman for many years. She lived to the age of 93 in a crime-ridden inner-city neighborhood by being as tough and nasty as any criminal living nearby. Her oddest actions involved her incorrect belief that she owned the road in front of her house. She didn't even own a car, but she insisted that nobody park there. She would confront them if they parked in front of her house. If they did it again, she slashed their tires in the middle of the night. Over and over for years. She was never caught, but everybody knew it was her. She only stopped when she lost the physical strength to slash a tire in her mid-80s. Then she started using spray paint on the cars. He doesn't park in front of my house anymore. Was all the justification she needed to damage her neighbor's cars. Story 21. This older lady lives across the street from me, and she is obsessed with leaves falling on her lawn, to the point that she will come out of her house and pick up one individual leaf off the grass in the fall or any other time. She spends hours a day outside with the leaf blower in fall. She will go and knock on other neighbors' doors if she thinks you have too many leaves on your grass. She'll come over into your yard and do it herself if you're not home. What I think is weird is that she's in her 70s, no kids or grandkids living with her, and lives alone in a pretty large 4-bedroom house with an amazing in-ground pool in the backyard with a slide and diving board and everything. Nobody has used that pool in at least 5 years yet. She opens it up every summer. Somehow she likes my family and has never once yelled at us about our leaves and randomly brings things over like half-eaten gallons of ice cream and asks if we want it because she's not using it. Story 22. The old lady who lived below me left me multiple cryptic letters blaming me for the birds chirping too loudly in the mornings. Not pet birds, but the sparrows and others outside. This went on for months. I'm flattered by the upvotes and awards. Thank you. To answer the most commonly asked question, yes, for a brief period I had a bird feeder. I took it down after a few months after receiving multiple cryptic letters. Eventually, management got involved and took her side even though bird feeders were explicitly allowed per the lease. There were several trees nearby, including one that literally hung onto both her and my balconies. I assure you that birds existed before I set up the feeder, as they continued to exist after. My sister and brother-in-law took over the lease 4 years ago, and they still get the occasional note from Bird Lady. Apartment management has even inspected their unit to verify there's no bird feeder or any other bird luring devices. I found one of the notes. Again, your bird droppings are on my railings, bird seeds on my porch and chairs, and your birds are ruining my night rest, wee hours of the morning, birds in your feeder chirping. The bird feeder was gone at this point. Story 23. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house unannounced. When my wife gets home, sometimes she wants to stay in her car having a phone conversation. He will come out and walk down the side of his house, checking his sprinkler controls and looking at my wife. He has 2 huge bushes he refuses to cut. They block our view when backing out of our driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the fireman, "This bush is older than you." Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. Story 24. She stalks us. Every time I get home, she'll walk outside and tell me I was either 3 minutes later getting home this time, or that I'm home 2 minutes earlier, and then ask me why. One time, my friend and her sister came to pick me up. The neighbor was against her window with her hands and face pressed up on the glass trying to see who was coming to pick me up. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me, telling me to hurry up because a crazy lady was staring at them through a window. I replied, "Oh, it's just the stalker neighbor." Yeah, that was a funny day. Story 25. We bought a house, and on the day while we were unloading the first truckload, the neighbor came into our garage uninvited and started telling us what trees on our property he wanted us to cut down. Not the craziest, but the audacity of some people. Story 26. Not sure if this counts as crazy, but I have this neighbor who is part of a spiritual organization called Brahma Kumaris. Every time someone in the neighborhood is going through rough times, especially deaths in the family, she goes to their house and instead of offering condolences, she preaches how they should join this organization and things will be better. She doesn't acknowledge anyone the rest of the time, except when someone dies or a new family moves in the neighborhood, to whom she preaches and gives books written by leaders of the organization. Story 27. He had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago, he had a road rage incident, and when he started banging on the other car's windows, the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this, he had a heart attack and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also, he doesn't yell anymore. Story 28. He murdered another older neighbor lady, beat her to death with his bare hands in the middle of our townhome complex. Well, it was actually her daughter and granddaughter that are my neighbors, but she was visiting them like she does every week. Next thing you know, detectives are knocking on my door seeing if I knew any information about him or the incident. The only thing I knew was he was always arguing with other neighbors. I looked him up on Facebook after the detectives left, and he had posted he was going to kill her 30 minutes before he was going to do it. He took pictures of her car and her daughter's house and posted it on Facebook with her address, saying, "I'm going to get the woman." Then after it happened, he posted, "Got the red-headed old woman." It is just crazy to me that at 5:30 p.m. in broad daylight, just a couple yards from my door, he killed her, and no one saw it happening. Edit to add, investigation is still ongoing. I'm not sure why it's not first-degree murder, and according to other neighbors, they've had confrontations before. Right now, his charge is second-degree with intent. The next court date isn't until September.